The cowboy woke with his face pressed into burning sand, the taste of blood and dust filling his mouth. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was, or even who he was. The desert stretched endlessly around him, pale and merciless. The sky a hard blue that offered no comfort. His horse was gone. His rifle lay several yards away, useless. Worse still, his canteen was missing. Panic tried to rise, but his body was too weak to obey it. He rolled onto his back with a groan. Every movement sent pain through him like fire. The sun beat down without mercy, stealing moisture from his skin. His breath, his very thoughts. His lips were cracked open, his tongue swollen and dry. He tried to swallow and felt nothing but raw agony. Time lost meaning as the heat pressed in. Minutes felt like hours. Hours blurred into something endless. By the time night fell, the cold replaced the heat, cutting just as deep. He shivered uncontrollably, curling in on himself, whispering names he hadn't spoken in years. Memories came uninvited, green fields, rain, the smell of coffee at dawn, mocking him with things he would never touch again. He knew the signs. He had seen men die like this, alone, forgotten, swallowed by the land. The second day broke him. His vision shimmered, the horizon bending and breathing. Rocks seemed to move. Voices drifted across the sand, calling his name in tones both gentle and cruel. He tried to answer, but could only manage a dry rasp. His strength was gone now. Death no longer frightened him. It simply waited. Then a shadow fell across his face. He squinted, thinking it another trick of the sun, but the shadow remained. A woman stood before him, her figure steady against the blinding light. She wore worn buckskin, stitched and repaired countless times. Her face was marked by years of hardship, her eyes dark and watchful. There was grief in them, deep. Settled grief, but also something harder, resolve. She knelt slowly, careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. Her hand hovered before touching his forehead, feeling the heat of his skin. She spoke softly in a language he did not know, her voice low and steady. The sound of it anchored him, pulling him back from the edge. For the first time since he'd fallen, the desert loosened its grip. He wasn't dead yet. The widow did not waste time on words or ceremony. She knew the signs of death as well as any healer. Skin burning with fever, breath shallow and uneven, lips cracked beyond speech. The desert had already taken nearly everything from the man lying before her. If she waited, it would take the rest. She dragged him inch by inch toward a narrow overhang where the rocks curved inward, offering a thin line of shade. Each pull tore at her palms, but she did not stop. Flies buzzed around his face, and she brushed them away with sharp flicks of her fingers. When she laid him down, his body barely reacted. That frightened her more than his wounds. She searched what little she carried. No dried meat, no roots, no waterskin. The drought had been long and cruel, even to those who knew how to survive it. She pressed her ear to his chest and listened. His heart still fought, stubborn and slow. The fever worsened as the sun climbed. His lips moved soundlessly, eyes rolling beneath closed lids. He could not swallow. Anything solid would choke him. She understood then what the desert demanded of her, and the understanding settled heavily on her shoulders. This was not desire. This was not comfort. This was survival. With practiced care, she lifted his head, supporting his neck, allowing only what his body could take. She stayed with him through the hours, offering nourishment in the only way possible, pacing herself so neither of them would collapse. When he coughed or struggled, she soothed him with quiet words. Steady hands, patience learned through loss. Memories of her own child flickered through her mind. Small hands, a laugh stolen by sickness years ago. The pain of it tightened her chest, but it also hardened her resolve. Life was life. It mattered, no matter whose blood ran in the veins. The man drifted between worlds. Sometimes his eyes fluttered open, unfocused, seeing nothing. Sometimes his breathing slowed so much she feared it had stopped. Each time she stayed. She wiped his brow. She cooled his skin with what little shade she could move with the sun. As night fell, his body finally eased. The fever did not break, but it no longer climbed. His breaths became deeper, more regular. Exhaustion crushed her, yet relief followed close behind. The desert had not won today. She leaned back against the rock, watching the stars emerge one by one. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new decisions. But for this night the man lived, and that was enough. Morning came quietly, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The light crept over the rocks and touched the cowboy's face, and for the first time since he had fallen, his eyes opened with purpose. They were clouded and weak, but they focused. He was alive, and he knew it. The widow noticed at once. She had been awake for hours, listening to his breathing, measuring each rise of his chest. When he stirred, she did not rush him. Survival had taught her patience. She offered shade with her body and let him adjust to the world returning. He tried to speak. Only a cracked whisper escaped. She pressed 2 fingers gently to his lips, signaling him to stop. Talking wasted strength. Instead, she held his hand, grounding him, letting him feel that another human stood beside him in this vast emptiness. His grip was faint, but it was real. By midday, the fever finally broke. Sweat soaked his shirt, carrying the sickness out of him. She cleaned him as best she could, using scraps of cloth and sand-smoothed care. His skin cooled. His breathing deepened. When he slept, it was no longer the restless sleep of a dying man, but the heavy rest of someone returning to life. When he woke again, his eyes followed her movements. Gratitude filled them, raw, overwhelming, wordless. He did not understand everything she had done, but he understood enough. No one survived the desert alone. Not like this. She sat a short distance away, sharpening a blade, keeping watch. She did not look at him often. Her role was nearly finished, and she knew it. Saving a life did not mean claiming it. The desert taught that too. Later that afternoon, distant movement appeared on the horizon. Apache scouts, riding low and fast. She stood and signaled them with practiced ease. Relief passed through her, not joy, but certainty. He would not be left behind again. When they reached the rock shelter, the widow stepped back, letting others take over. They lifted the cowboy carefully, offering water in small, controlled sips. As they prepared to carry him away, he turned his head toward her, fear flashing across his face at the thought of losing sight of the one thing that had kept him alive. She met his gaze calmly. She placed her hand over her heart, then extended it toward him, a silent truth. "You live, that is enough." As they carried him into the open desert, he watched her grow smaller against the rocks, a lone figure standing firm against the endless land. He would never forget her face or the cost of his survival. The desert would erase their tracks by nightfall, but it would never erase what she had done. The journey back to the settlement was slow and painful, but the cowboy endured it with a quiet strength he hadn't known he still possessed. Each mile carried him farther from the edge of death and deeper into the weight of what had been done for him. Water returned to his body in careful measures. Food followed in small, deliberate bites. Life reassembled itself piece by fragile piece. Days later, when he could finally stand without swaying, the desert no longer looked the same. It wasn't just land and sky anymore. It was a place where a single human decision could stand against death itself. At night, as he lay wrapped in blankets, he dreamed of the widow's steady eyes and the calm certainty in her movements. She appeared in his sleep not as a savior or a ghost, but as a reminder of how close the world always is to losing what matters. He asked about her when his voice returned. The Apache men answered simply. She was known among them as someone who endured, a woman who had buried a husband, a child, and still walked forward without bitterness. She asked for no recognition. She had already returned to the land, to her path, as she always did. The knowledge settled heavily in his chest. When he was strong enough to ride again, he did not go back to the life he had lived before. He avoided the careless risks, the lonely bravado that once pushed him into the open desert without preparation. He listened more. He watched the sky. He learned to respect silence. Sometimes at dawn he rode out, alone to high ground, and looked toward the distant stretches of sand and stone. He knew he would never find her again. Some people entered a life only once, leaving marks too deep for repetition. Still, he carried her with him, in the way he shared his water with strangers, in the way he stopped to help instead of passing by. Years later, when his hair had begun to gray, he told the story to a young man dying of thirst on a cattle drive gone wrong. He did not embellish it. He did not make himself the hero. He spoke only of a woman who had nothing left to give except herself, and who gave it without hesitation. The young man lived, and each time another life was spared because of what he had learned. The widow's quiet act echoed forward, unbroken by time or distance. The desert still took many. It always would, but it did not take him. Because once, long ago, someone chose that it would not.